On the edge of the Arctic, there was once a European kingdom that your school never mentioned. Stone churches, cattle grazing, ships carrying ivory and wool to the kings of Norway. And then, nothing. No last stand, no famous battle, just silence. When later sailors returned, they found ruins and graves under drifting snow. So, what happened to the Norse of Greenland? How does an entire colony, loyal to the Pope and tied to European trade, simply disappear? Let's go back to the beginning, because the answer starts with one very ambitious Viking. Around 982 AD, Eric the Red is exiled from Iceland for manslaughter. Instead of disappearing in disgrace, he sails west into the unknown. For 3 years, he explores a massive ice-framed coast and returns with a brilliant marketing trick. He calls it Greenland to make it sound inviting. It works. Around 985, he leads hundreds of settlers, families, livestock, priests, across the North Atlantic. They aren't raiders, they're builders. But here's the twist. They're importing a European lifestyle into an environment that never got the memo. By the late 10th and 11th centuries, two main settlements grow. The eastern settlement near modern Qaqortoq and the western settlement closer to Nuuk. Maybe 2,000 to 3,000 people at their peak. Turf houses cling to green fjord edges, cattle and sheep graze short summers, and hay is cut frantically for brutal winters. They build stone churches, including a cathedral at Gardar with a resident bishop. This isn't a rough camp. It's a small European society. But it's a society built on a knife edge. One bad winter isn't just uncomfortable, it's deadly. So why stay in such a harsh place? Because Greenland had something Europe wanted: walrus ivory. In a world before mass African elephant ivory, walrus tusks were luxury goods. Carved into religious objects, chess sets like the famous Lewis chessmen, and royal ornaments. Greenland also exported hides, rope, and falcons. In return, ships from Norway carried timber, iron, tools, cloth, even wine. For centuries, this fragile trade lifeline kept the colony afloat. But that wasn't the only pressure shaping their world. Overhead, the climate itself was shifting, and not in their favour. When the Norse arrived, they benefited from what historians call the medieval warm period. Summers were milder, sea ice retreated, and pastures could support cattle and sheep. But around the 13th and 14th centuries, temperatures drop. We enter the Little Ice Age. Sea ice grows, sailing seasons shorten, and storms become more dangerous. Archaeology shows thinner cattle bones and more reliance on seals, signs of worsening conditions. Shorter growing seasons mean less hay, and less hay means livestock die. But climate alone didn't kill this colony. The real story is a stack of pressures, all piling up at once. To survive, Greenlanders double down on hunting. They travel farther north in dangerous waters, chasing walrus and seals among shifting ice. At sites like Sandnes, archaeologists find more seal and caribou bones in later layers, fewer cattle. It's adaptation, but a desperate one. Meanwhile, Europe is changing. After the 1200s, elephant ivory becomes more available, undercutting walrus tusk prices. The Black Death devastates Norway in the mid-14th century, reducing shipping and royal interest in distant colonies. So Greenland's main export loses value, and its main trade partner collapses. Still, the settlers hang on. For a while. Here's where another mystery enters: the Inuit. The Norse called them Skraelings. The Thule culture, ancestors of modern Inuit, spread into northern Greenland around the 13th century, perfectly adapted to the Arctic with kayaks, dog sleds, and advanced seal hunting. Did they clash with the Norse? Maybe, sometimes. But evidence suggests limited contact, some trade, perhaps some tension. Norse sites contain Inuit-style artifacts, and Inuit stories may echo memories of these pale strangers. Yet there's no clear sign of a genocidal war. If not conquest, then what? The colony seems to wither from within. The last written trace from Norse Greenland is strangely ordinary. In 1408, At Valsey Church, a wedding is performed between Thorstein Olafsson and Sigrid Björnsdottir. The marriage is later recorded in Icelandic documents, proving that around 1400, the eastern settlement still functioned. Priests, law, ritual, community life. Then the written record goes dark. No follow-up, no plea for help, nothing. By the early 1400s, the western settlement is already gone, described as abandoned when visited from the east. So how do we know what happened after the ink runs out? The answers come from the ground. At farms and churches like Brattahlid and Gardar, archaeologists uncover bones, pollen, and building remains. Isotope analysis of human bones shows diets shifting heavily toward marine foods, especially seals, in later centuries. Graveyards reveal signs of chronic malnutrition and physical stress. Pollen records show grazing damage and soil erosion. All this points to a society under increasing strain. Yet we don't find burned churches or mass slaughter. Instead, we see thinning populations and abandoned buildings. It looks less like sudden catastrophe and more like a slow unraveling. Imagine winter in a Greenlandic turf house during the colony's last century. The walls sweat and freeze. Smoke stings your eyes. Outside, storms rage. Sea ice blocks travel. Inside, there's less butter, less meat, thinner cheese rations. Some livestock were likely slaughtered earlier each year to save hay. The elite, chieftains and clergy may have struggled to maintain prestige when imported goods dwindled. Social tensions, disease, and simple exhaustion could follow. People aren't just bodies in a harsh climate, they're minds under constant pressure. At some point, staying may have felt worse than leaving, if leaving was even possible. Then comes another blow. Isolation. After 1261, Greenland falls under the Norwegian crown, but the monarchy's resources are limited. Royal trade monopolies and the devastation of the Black Death mean fewer ships sail west. Sea ice increases, storms intensify, and captains become more cautious. A colony that once sent bishops to European councils and paid tithes to Rome becomes a ghost on the edge of maps. When contact is rare, small disasters become fatal. Lose a ship with key supplies, and there is no backup. The North Atlantic is turning from a highway into a wall. So how did it end? The most widely accepted view. There was no single dramatic finale. Over the 14th and 15th centuries, people died of hunger, disease, accidents. Young survivors looked at shrinking herds, failing crops, and uncertain seas, and chose to leave, if they still had boats and the skill. Some might have sailed back to Iceland or Norway and simply blended in, their Greenland years becoming a family story. Others may have drifted further north or perished at sea. And some might not have left at all, but adapted in a different way. Could some Norse have joined Inuit communities? We don't have smoking gun evidence, but some clues are suggestive. Inuit oral traditions tell of encounters, and sometimes intermarriage, with foreigners. Genetic studies haven't clearly identified medieval Norse ancestry in Greenland Inuit, but absence of proof isn't proof of absence in such small populations. Norse artifacts turn up in Inuit contexts, hinting at exchange, scavenging, or closer contact. If a few desperate families adopted Inuit technologies and lifeways, they would vanish from European records, but not from Greenland. The end of Norse Greenland might be less disappearance and more transformation. By the time European powers return in force, the story is already over. In the early 1700s, Danish-Norwegian expeditions, including those linked to missionary Hans Egede, search for surviving Norse Christians. They find only Inuit communities and haunting ruins. Stone churches like Valsey still stand roofless against the wind. No medieval Europeans, no living memory of them. For Europe, the Norse of Greenland become a cautionary tale, a Christian colony lost beyond the frontier, swallowed by ice and silence. But the real lesson is more complicated than simple failure. Norse Greenland didn't just vanish. It was squeezed out by climate change, economic shifts, political neglect, and cultural rigidity. They clung to European farming ideals in a land better suited to Inuit-style adaptation. Their story is not just medieval trivia, it's a mirror. What happens when a society is slow to adapt to a changing environment and global market? When its lifelines fray and it keeps hoping things will go back to normal? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the unknown, subscribe for more uninteresting history.